Hi there, and welcome to the Sports 2000 podcast. This series takes you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series that includes Durotechs and Pintos. I'm Sue Stockdale, and I talk to some of the people involved in the Sports 2000 community, giving you an insight into why Sports 2000 is sometimes called motorsport's best kept secret. Well, today I'm talking to another of the newer competitors on the grid, Nick Bailey, who drives in the Pinto category. But that doesn't mean that he's new to racing. In fact, he was a spectator at the first ever Sports 2000 race in 1977. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
And you, Sue. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, as we are in the Sports 2000 podcast, I always like to find out from drivers what car they drive and, from a practical perspective, what colour and what number it is. So how would you describe yours?
It's actually a bit of a homage car to an early 1970s Porsche sports racing car. So it's in Gulf blue with orange arrows on, and it's a Royale S2000M.
Wow, that sounds lovely. And what number is it?
Number 12.
Oh, wonderful. What got you interested in motorsport in the first place, Nick?
Yeah, it was one of those things that I think is fairly common with boys and their dads. My dad took me to Alton Park Gold Cup in 1960, would you believe? And I was told I witnessed Sterling Moss winning in a Lotus 18, but I don't remember it. All I actually did was run up and down a part of the section of the track called Clay Hill with a lot of dinky toys in my hands, I think.
Somehow that experience must have inspired you somewhere along the way.
Indeed.
How did you then get into Sports 2000?
Well, that's a longer story. In the 1960s, we actually switched to watching motorbikes, and I got involved in motorsport as a marshal in the 60s. And then in 69, I was very poorly. I almost lost my life to a thing called osteomyelitis, and I missed the whole first year at school. And one of the things that my father stumbled over was a karting magazine. So when we came out of that, about a year later, I had several part-time jobs and managed to get a second-hand kart, and we started karting in 71. And since then, raced in a number of series, Clubmans, Formula Three, those kind of things. But actually witnessed the very first Sports 2000 race in 1977, which is featured on the website, Jabina Galitza, again at the Alton Park Gold Cup. And I was fascinated by the whole formula, but didn't get involved until 18 months ago.
What is it about the Sports 2000 formula that particularly intrigues you, Nick?
I like sports racing cars, and I think, like a lot of drivers, influenced by that wonderful film Le Mans that Steve McQueen was in. So, fell in love with things like Porsche 917s and Ferrari P4s and all this kind of thing. And so it really stuck with me. And if I'm honest, I favour sports racing cars over single-seaters. So it was an ambition. And I almost bought a Lola in 1989, but didn't, and bought the March 793 Formula 3 car.
Wow. And what was that like to drive?
Very quick. It felt like it. So, yeah, it was very enjoyable. I raced it from 89, 1991 until the imminent arrival of my first daughter. And that was the second time I retired from this sport.
And then once you had then decided to go back into motorsport and decided on Sports 2000 then, how did you get to work out, I guess, how to drive it? I'm imagining it's quite different from that March 793.
Yeah, I did have another sojourn into Clubman's cars again between 2001 and 2003, and then there was an 18-year gap until I bought the Sports 2000 off a current competitor, Paul Tickner. And you highlight something there that's quite front of mind at the moment, in as much that I'm finding it difficult to get to grips with these cars. They're quite different in terms of the fact that a Sports 2000 Pinto, anyway, not a Durotech, but a Pinto, doesn't have any aero. And therefore, getting the vehicle onto the limit and drive it at the limit consistently and quickly is something that's proving a bit of a challenge.
And how do you train, if there is such a thing, in between races then, Nick? Or do you just turn up and hope for the best each time?
No, I take fitness quite seriously. So yesterday I was at the gym. I go to the gym and do weights 3 times a week. I do yoga twice a week. I did a 22-mile bike ride on Saturday. So I take all that physical, mental side of it all quite seriously. What we need to do is get back the track knowledge. That's where I'm feeling rusty. And it's not always easy to find the budget and or the time to do lots and lots of testing before each round. But a lot of people are taking the formula very seriously, and that's good, and do. So we've got a gap to close there.
So it's as much about the familiarity of the circuit, as you say, that will make the difference in addition to driver skill.
Exactly. Both of those factors are there. My skills have got to get back up to where they were back in 2002, 2003, when I was close to the lap record with the people I've been competing against. But at the moment, we're quite a way off the pace. So driver skilled, car setup and circuit knowledge, it's the three key things.
So there you bring into the conversation, Nick, that third point that we haven't yet mentioned around car setup. How do you go about doing that?
Well, obviously, we've got some experience in the team, but we haven't got Sports 2000 specific experience. So what we've been soliciting and getting a lot of support from competitors, which is a nice thing about the series and the formula and the people in it, is advice and guidance. So only last week, we did quite a lot of changes to the car, which hopefully will get us nearer the pointy end of the grid at Brands Hatch.
I guess by the time this episode comes out, maybe we'll have seen the results of that, and hopefully that will be successful. Nick, I know you've written a book about sales, and in that book, there's 3 R's that struck me as I was reading it, about risk, relationships, and record.
Yeah.
And it was making me think about the risk aspect of driving a Sports 2000. And what do you think's the riskiest part of competing?
Sports 2000 is no more or less risky than any other formula or class. For me, the riskiest part, which came to the fore at Donington in the first round this year, is the start. It's always the riskiest part because people can stall in front of you. And that's exactly what happened to me in one of the races. So that's a pretty hairy moment. A Pinto will do 60 mile an hour in first gear off the line. So being faced with the back end of another Sports 2000 in front of you when you're flat in first is not funny for a few seconds. So diversionary tactics were deployed, and thankfully I missed him. But for me, that's it. Once you get going, I think, first corner incidents always happen. I managed to roll a Mallock at Donington at Redgate in 1978 to the point where it took the top off my helmet. So, risk and those kind of things are all part of the game. But I think if you allowed it to get to you, you would never get in the car in the first place.
So it strikes me there's also as much about trusting the other competitors on the grid, just to your point there about somebody stalling in front of you, that you're trusting everyone to drive cleanly and to, I guess, get off the line cleanly as well.
Yeah.
Is that the sense that you have, is about the whole driver experience and making it clean racing?
Yeah, that's a very, very important factor for me. It's stated very clearly and quite forcefully on the website in terms of if you're going to come and do Sports 2000 with us, then we expect these driver standards. So far, I've seen those driver standards deployed, which is very good. That doesn't mean there isn't hard racing. That doesn't mean there hasn't been a little bit of rubbing going on here and there, but that's all part and parcel of the thing. Try to avoid contact wherever possible, but at the same time, racing drivers are racing drivers.
They always want to win.
Yep.
Now, as we were speaking, Nick, there has already been a couple of Pinto-only races, which is a new experience for this year, 2022. I'm wondering how you've found them compared to racing in a mixed race along with the Duratec's as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed the outings last year with the Duratec's. It's frantic as soon as they start to lap you, which they do. You spend as much time looking in your mirrors as you're looking forward, which is not a good thing necessarily, but you're trying to do your best to allow people who are dicing for championships and that kind of thing through. So I would have to say that the Pinto-only championship is a more appealing prospect purely because we're more likely to get our own dices in without our own dices and championship positions being, impacted by some really quick and talented drivers in the Duratec series.
And maybe there's less time looking in your rear view mirror when there's only Pintos on the grid.
Yes, indeed. Well, for a while.
Yes, depends where you are in the running order. Again, just on your experience of being in the Sports 2000 community, bearing in mind you're a fairly new member, how are you finding it being in the club?
Yeah, I've been vocal about this at the Christmas dinner dance as well. It's been really supportive. People have been proactively coming along and asking how I've gone on, can they help? I've explained some of the things and difficulties I've had, and I've had help and advice and support. Nobody has turned me down for help and advice and support when I've asked for it. And fellow competitor at Silverstone, Trevor Welsh, we had a GoPro break once again on us, and Trevor was there with a new GoPro case so that I could get out in the second race. And that's typical of what I've been finding.
So that sense of camaraderie and support that certainly other guests on the podcast have mentioned as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, you strike me as quite an adventurous person, Nick. I've already alluded to the question of risk that was in your book.
Yeah.
What other so-called risky things might you have undertaken in your lifetime?
Well, I do set my goals every year, and I have been accused of being a bit of an adrenaline junkie. So in addition to motorsport, I am a qualified and regular scuba diver. So I've dived all over the world. I've hung in 20 metres of water in the Maldives with giant manta rays coming around me, which was just an almost spiritual experience, really. Just totally fabulous. And in more recent years, skiing. I've skied since 88, but I tend to get there probably every 6 years or so. But I went for my 60th birthday because I always had this ambition to do the Hahnenkamm, which is the craziest and most demanding run in a place called Kitzbühel in Austria. And I missed my objective, I have to admit, because it was black ice on the black sections of the run. So I did the reds and the blues, and that was frightening enough for me.
And what does all this risk-taking give you then, Nick?
It's just a sense of being alive. I mean, people can give you the technical reasons of the hormones that get produced, the endorphin rush and all that kind of stuff. It's speaking to fellow competitors last year, we were laughing about the fact that how long does it take you to come down from a weekend's racing? And for me, if I've had a good race and it's been a good dice, it's probably about Thursday afterwards. You're really, really up there for a while, and it's like a good dive or a good ski or whatever. So it's it's creating the rush.
Yeah, I can imagine. And as you say, just from driving fast, but also doing these other things. I also understand that you do quite a bit of art. Now, some people might say that art's not a very risky thing to do. What does that do for you?
It's something that goes back to when I was at school, I think. It was just a passion. Art was a passion. I was very good at technical drawing. So I kind of wanted to be a technical illustrator, but that wasn't to be, and went off to do other things in telecom engineering as an initial career. And I really parked my artistic ambitions then until probably 2006. So that was a big park of about 30 odd years. But, I went on one of these corporate development courses. They challenge your thinking and what is it you've wanted to do that you've never done and why haven't you done it type question. For me, that was art. So I got this passion around portraiture. So between 2006 and I guess 2016, I concentrated quite heavily before I got back involved with motorsport in learning how to paint portraits properly.
So it seems to me that there's something about testing yourself, testing your capabilities, and then seeing how far that can take you.
Yes, that's very, very intuitive.
So you know what my next question would be is exactly what you got asked on that training course all those years ago. What haven't you yet done, and what other things do you want to be testing your capabilities in?
I guess this is not one that's risk-oriented, but I'm delighted and privileged to be able to get involved with bringing up my grandchildren. So I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter, recently arrived last November, grandson, and I'm determined that if allowed, I'm not going to bring them up wrapped up in cotton wool balls, and that we're going to have a lot of fun together and help develop 2 bright, adventurous kids.
And no doubt they'll be on the sidelines at Oulton Park at some stage in the future, watching Grandad race, maybe?
Maybe. Yeah, that would be very nice.
Well, it might be full circle back to your parents taking you when you were a youngster to watch motorsport.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what do you think there's still to do within Sports 2000 then, with this appetite for risk-taking and pushing yourself? What do you want to keep improving on within Sports 2000 and driving your Pinto Royale?
All aspects, really. As we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I think, I've got a way to go to reignite whatever skills I had 18 years ago, and circuit knowledge. I was talking to an instructor yesterday that I've known that I used to race against back in 1988 in Formula Ford. We had a very long discussion about how to get that circuit knowledge back up to speed, and we've got a plan for doing something a bit later in the year to help me progress in that department. At the moment, I'm in the back half of the grid and the back half of the championship, and I've got an objective by the end of the year to be in the front. That's realistic. I don't think I'm going to win anything. I don't think I'm going to break any lap records. But again, talking to people like Trevor and other people, they came back to the sport, and in particular the Sports 2000 championship, and taken him 4 years to get to the front end and win the championship last year. So if that's the kind of benchmark that I've got to look at, then I'm happy to be involved in doing that.
It sounds like you're applying the second R of your 3 Rs around relationships and learning from others around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a discussion with someone last week about this. The individual involved said, this is what I'm good at. What do you think you're good at? I've spent my life surrounding myself with people who know more about the stuff I want to achieve than I do. Because we can't know everything about everything we want to do. Just being involved in an amateur level with Sports 2000 is a team sport. And I've got guys who help. They've got strengths and weaknesses. I've got strengths and weaknesses. But if we pull all those strengths and weaknesses together, then we've got a fully functioning team. And that's the ambition, is to get us singing along as individuals, but as a team as well, to get a result.
So it sounds like you're applying some of that knowledge from your business experience into what you're aiming to do within your team in Sports 2000.
Yeah, definitely.
Thinking just more generally about racing and driving fantastic cars, Nick, if I was to say you could drive any car in the world, what car would you just love to drive?
Porsche 917. It's just my all-time favourite racing car. I managed to actually sit in the 1971 Le Mans winning car at Goodwood and had a long chat with a very accomplished and famous racing driver called Richard Atwood, who was the co-driver with Hans Hermann in the Stuttgart 23 car. After I'd tried on 3 previous occasions to get him to let me sit in the car at Goodwood, and he said no. And on this occasion he gave up. My wife was there, and we got this fantastic video clip of me asking him, well, what is it like to go down the Mulsanne at 240 mile an hour at night in a 917? He said, well, it's scary for the first 10 laps, but then it just becomes business as usual. Which I found extraordinary.
It sounds like it was an amazing experience to just sit in the car and imagine that happening.
Yeah, well, it was eye-opening, to be honest, because for anybody who's managed to do the same thing, you get in this vehicle and there's no monocoque chassis as we have even in the Sports 2000. It was just a space frame leather chassis, which felt more like a big cart, yet feet and ankles were over the front axle line. So, virtually no protection whatsoever. So to imagine the likes of Richard and Brian Redman and Frank Gardner and all the other Helmut Marko, all these guys who raced these things, it was phenomenal bravery to circulate for 24 hours in those vehicles.
Takes risk-taking to another level, perhaps.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then for circuits, I've asked you about cars. Is there any particular circuit that you just love to drive that you haven't been on yet?
Yeah, I guess Spa is one that's mentioned a lot. It looks fantastically challenging. I have my favourites in the UK, those being the 3 parks, Alton Park, Cadwell Park and Donington Park. But outside of the UK and into Europe, then I'd even like to do the old Nürburgring in something serious, but we'll have to see.
And those 3 parks that are in Britain that you just described, what is it about those circuits that makes them enjoyable to drive?
Well, they are very quick, but they're also very demanding in terms of skill and being able to carry corner speed. So they embrace, for me, all of the skills and courage and requirement that you need to drive any racing car well, and they produce the best endorphin rush.
It sounds like from all the things we've spoken about today, Nick, that you certainly love to challenge yourself. And I'm imagining over the next few years that helping to support and inspire your grandchildren will be equally challenging at times.
Well, almost certainly already has been.
If you were going to be giving your perspective as a fairly new driver into Sports 2000 to any of our listeners who maybe are thinking about participating, what would you say to them about your experience over the last few years that might inspire them or encourage them?
I think, it's a great formula with great people. So you've got exciting racing cars, which are not horrendously expensive to run. They are expensive to run like all racing cars are. And you've got to get a big welcome and a lot of support, a lot of advice, a lot of guidance, and people aren't going to be knocking you off at the first corner. A lot of these formulas, if you watch them, all the formulas, there's people being taken out all the time. And that's not really what motor racing's about for me. I don't mind the risk element of it, but at the end of the day, these things are expensive enough to run, never mind repair.
Well, it's been lovely to speak to you today, Nick. I wish you well with your plans to get to know the circuits more clearly over the next few months so that it will help you to improve your performance. And no doubt by the time this podcast is published, those listening will be able to tell whether Brands Hatch had the desired effect in terms of your preparations for that race too.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for your invitation, Sue. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing Nick Bailey's perspective as one of the newer members in the Sports 2000 community. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please help us to spread the word by either leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on, and tell your friends about it too. Remember, you can keep connected with Sports 2000 on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, and we'll also have the links to the website in the show notes. I've been Sue Stockdale, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon for the next episode of the Sports 2000 podcast.